So in this video, I'm going to ramble a little bit because I'm going to try and talk about a concept that isn't normally addressed. It's this concept that you have a melody and you need to write a harmony to it, right? You have a composition and you want to try and fill it in, create that substance that supports your melody. And we're talking mostly about conventional music right now because of course, if you're going to write like Stockhausen or some of John Cage's works, you're not going to write a piece that's very melodic. It's going to be more about the particular objects that you're using and how you're going to employ them in the composition. But when we're talking about a melody, when I work with composers, that I can think of, I've never worked with a composer, and I've been doing this since 1996. Well, officially 1998, but I've been doing it for a long time. And I've never met a composer who came to me and said, I have manufactured this melody. Meaning, I wrote a melody, I thought about a high point, I thought about the key I wanted to start in, I used a lot of stepwise motion, I threw in some skips and some leaps to kind of create tension and vary the motion a little bit. I made sure that high point was consonant with the starting pitch, and then I had kind of a fall from that high point to my final conclusion, and I feel my melody was very satisfying because of that. I've never seen a composer do that. I've never heard of a composer that does this. I'm sure there are some that do it, but the composers that I've worked with generally don't think that way. They'll come to me and they'll say, I came up with a melody. I don't really know where it came from. Maybe some of them will believe it came from deep within themselves. Some people will feel that they just kind of sat there and thought through various motives and then it turned into a melody. Others, and this is a common belief throughout history, believe that the melodies came from God or a higher power and that they were simply vessels. But I've never really heard a composer come to me and say, this melody I've created was manufactured out of 3 pitches. Yet that is how we teach it in college and in most composition courses. We'll say, write a piece using the octatonic scale, write a piece in Dorian, write a piece using set theory. And composers are supposed to walk away knowing how to write music that is original to them from this process. And don't get me wrong, that process is important because through that process of doing sort of a traditional composition program where you learn all these different devices, you are expanding your capabilities. You're expanding your ability to compose music in a variety of styles that may not be natural to you, and that forces you to think about music in sort of a different way. And it really helps to build your technique, but that's what it ends up being, technique. And so that technique can help you better articulate your own ideas, but it is just a technique. And if you've been following me at all, you know that I care about technique, but it's not what you need to compose. So 9 times out of 10, and I'm even leaning towards 100% of the time, a composer comes to me and they don't really know where their melody came from. Okay, it just kind of came out of the sky. They were inspired, it came to them. And the problem with this is that I think is actually the correct approach. But then once you have your melody, you need to start really thinking about it and thinking about what is in that melody. What are some of the key features of that melody that are really important that you want to bring out? And so then at that point, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make it coherent for the audience. You're trying to say, okay, I have a melody, but if I don't isolate the important aspects of it, then it's going to be a wash of sound for my audience. It's going to be ambiguous. They're not going to be able to tell where it starts and ends. Now, depending on your level of talent, you'll be able to create a melody that's more or less perfect just by singing a melody. You can just start singing bum ba dum bum bum beam 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 bum bum, something like that, and you can create a melody that works and that people can follow. And that largely has to do with your innate talent and your understanding of music on a very intuitive level. And so there's ways to develop that. And one of those ways is through simply studying scores, listening to a lot of music, composing every day. These are some of the things that can help you get better at composing, right? If you practice something, you get better at it. But the one thing that I really want to talk about, I mean, we can talk about melody at some point in the future, but what I really want to talk about is the part that baffles me. Because we have composers that come in and they create these beautiful melodies. And then they say, I used a 1, 4, 5, 1 progression. I use the predominant here as a way to create a preparation for the dominant, and then that tonic closure really helps this melody feel like it comes to a close. That's one method. The really theoretical composer, and they'll talk about their tonic expansion, and they'll talk about how they're creating tension with their harmony, and they'll use particular chord progressions, or they'll write out very specific chords, and you can tell they have a very firm understanding of music theory. That's sort of category one. Another category of composer won't necessarily use theory in that way. They will look at the melody and they'll try and extract the harmony from the melody. And this is something that Schoenberg actually talks about quite a bit. You can, if you look at Beethoven, or you look at Mozart, you look at most composers, you can extract the harmony from the melody. You can see how the harmony supports the melody. So if you have kind of a C, E, G, right? Just as an example, you've got this melody. You can see how the composer in the melody, maybe this was a harmony, just added passing tones. You can see how that harmonic structure came out of the melody. And so I think we make the mistake of thinking a few things, either that the composer had a harmonic progression in mind, or that once they created their melody, they then went back and created a harmonic progression by extracting the melody. And this is actually one of the videos that I show you how to do this. But do I think that's actually the way to compose? No. And you have to think of it this way. If you came up with your melody intuitively, the reason it's easy to come up with a melody, I believe, is because it doesn't require a whole lot of intellectual activity. You can sing a melody. You can't sing a harmony. I can't sing 3 notes at once. I mean, actually, you can. There are singers that do it. Just look for Mad King, right? That piece, they definitely can use throat singing and sing multiple pitches, but majority of us, we can't sing more than 1 note at a time. And so that makes it very hard for us to hear 1 note at a time, because what we tend to be able to do is what we can create in the world. So if I can sing a melody, I can hear a melody. If I could sing harmony, I could probably hear harmony, but I can't sing harmony. And so what ends up happening is we create through intuition these really beautiful melodies, and then we manufacture the harmony through whatever means you use, whether it's theory, counterpoint, extracting it from the melody, taking aspects of the melody, little motivic fragments, and using those to create a backdrop. These are all ways of manufacturing your composition. And so one of the things that I really like to stress is this ability to hear multiple independent lines in your head very clearly. Because when you can do that, the melody doesn't have to be created separate from the harmony. This is actually the greatest trick, and it's all it is. This is the greatest trick to composing really effective music. If you can hear everything at once, and you intuit the melody and the harmony at the same time, when you can get to that stage, then you're composing truly inspired music, I feel. That is my opinion on this. And it takes practice. It takes time. The Flawless course, the Flawless Ear Training course that I'm providing on here, is part of that process. But for a composer, you also need to do audiation exercises. And so that's one of the things that I teach my students is I teach them how to begin audiating music. And over the course of 6 months, I give them a lot of tools to slowly develop this inner ear, because the nice thing about the inner ear is you may start by just hearing a drone and a melody on top of that. And then maybe you can hear 2 lines. And then eventually you can hear 3. What happens is you'll reach a point of saturation where all of a sudden everything just clicks. And you're hearing music as if it was in the room with you. That can happen. It doesn't happen all the time. It generally happens when you're kind of in a very sedate state of mind, when you're very relaxed. Sometimes when you're coming out of sleep, sometimes when you're going into sleep. But it can happen in the waking world too. And that's sort of the goal, is to continue to create this sense of audiation, which is where we're hearing music internally. And there's audiation's a very specific term coined by Dr. Gordon back in 1976 or 78, somewhere around there. But it's a term that really refers to a very specific process of understanding what you're hearing. It's not as simple as you sing a melody and then you hear that melody internally, or you listen to a song and you hear that song internally. That's just imitating. That's just hearing what's out in the world and bringing it into your mind's ear. So audiation is a little bit more specific than that. And that is what I teach my composers, is how to not only create these sounds themselves, but how to understand what those sounds are. Because if you can just audiate, but you can't extract those sounds and put them into notes on the page, then you're still missing a big piece of the puzzle. So, I mean, this is a really important concept. And when composers can understand how to audiate, they don't need to rely so much on theory. There's still a place for music theory, but it's not in the creation of the piece. When you're creating a piece, it needs to be intuitive, it needs to be natural, and it needs to be worked out in your mind, not even at the piano. If you use a piano or another instrument notation program, the instrument you're using is writing the piece for you. You think you're writing it, but you're not. You're randomly throwing in notes and checking to see if they sound okay. And you get really good at that, to the point where you actually think, oh, I'm controlling this, I'm writing it, but you're not. The only way you're actually writing the music is if you hear it internally and then you extract it to paper. And when you can develop this skill, it's really amazing, because you can work on a composition for days, weeks, months, and then when it comes time to notate it, you notate it and it's done. And there's some other things that go along with this, which are more advanced, which once you have it notated, then you go through and you really start analyzing it. And that's where the theory aspect of things comes in, where you want to make sure that it's being presented in the best way possible. But again, that's another discussion. So I just kind of want to talk about this because I think that people understand how melody can be created. I think most of us can create a melody, but harmony is more difficult. And so it's something to work on, it's something to practice. And once you get it, you're going to be in a really good place compositionally.